Hi there, it's Marzena. Summer is right around the corner, so it is a great time for this year's summer-themed ferry. Personally, I can't imagine better summer vacation than spending time near the water and engaging in some water activities. Ocean, sea, lake, pond or stream. As long as it's wet and can cool me down in a hot summer day, I don't care what it is. Yeah, water is definitely my element. So the best choice for my summer ferry was to base her on some water creature. Okay then, let's dive in and make a frog ferry. The one that almost no one asked for. At first I wanted to use this Venus Mac flytrap as a base because of her skin tone, but in the end I chose Laguna Blue. I just decided that Laguna's face sculpt fits the frog concept way better. The steps for doll preparation are always the same for me. First, I cut all the hair as close to the scalp as possible. Then I sunk the head in a boiling water. This step serves two purposes. First, it softens the vinyl, so the head is easier to remove from the neck peg. This neck cracked though, but it is not hard to glue the broken piece back and fix it. Heating up the head also melts the glue inside the head, so the hair plugs are now easier to remove. Some dolls have more glue and some, like this one, almost none. Gooey hair plugs are yucky, but I do prefer that option. I removed the doll's original face with 100% acetone. And with this step finished, I could start the head shrinking. Long story short, I prepared a jar that I can close tightly. I measured the proportions and marked them so I don't need to do the measuring with every project. I filled the jar with acetone and water solution. The proportions are 9 parts of pure acetone and 1 part of water. The submerged head stays in this solution for 2 days, and then I let it dry for another 2. And I always repeat the process twice. While the head was getting shrunk, I focused on fixing the neck. Unfortunately, I lost a tiny piece of the neck, so I needed to fix it with epoxy sculpt. I put in some pieces of masking tape to create the boundaries for epoxy. I also cut off the fins from the doll's forearms. After 8 days of shrinking, the head was ready for some alterations. First, let's say bye-bye to those fishy ears. I snapped them off and smoothed the area with a fine grit milling cutter. Then I removed the lower lip. I didn't really need to do that part, but I just needed to warm up to prepare myself for more scary changes. So I marked her new mouth shape and cut it out. The vinyl was pretty hard after the head shrinking, so I had to use a little strength there. When I was satisfied with the shape of the hole, I sanded down the scalp slightly because I will be covering it with epoxy later. I widened the neck hole and snip-snapped the neck peg. I removed the masking tape from the neck and my epoxy fixing cracked. So I put some super glue on the crack, hoping that it will strengthen the connection. When the glue dried, I wiped the body with non-acetone nail polish remover. Remember that acetone can melt the plastic and it's only safe to use on the vinyl parts. I slimmed down the neck a little bit and finally, with the help of my hair dryer, I reconnected the head with the body. Time for her new mouth. First I filled the hole to create the oral cavity. I also needed to alter her jaw to fit her new expression. Here I noticed that the neck fixing fell off, but I didn't care anymore. I gave her new lips and lower dental arch. I also added those characteristic membranes in the corners of her new mouth. Last but not least, I covered the scalp and created teeny tiny holes for our girl's hearing purposes. I let the epoxy cure overnight, and on the next morning I sanded it down really well, cause there's nothing worse than a nasty transition on your doll's face. I sprayed the head with grey primer, and it helped me notice which areas were still worth working on. I didn't like the huge upper lip and the transition on her right cheek. The problem with the cheek was bigger, cause after sanding, the epoxy part level was lower than the vinyl level, if you know what I mean. First, I tried to smooth the transition with painted on varnish to even the levels a little, but it still wasn't satisfying. With nail polish remover, I cleaned her face. And that was a mistake, cause another layer of the primer reacted weirdly with the remover, creating an odd texture, which I needed to sand down again. At some point I just gave up, sprayed the primed head with 3 layers of Mr. Super Clear and move on with the face up. I really wanted to push this project forward. To be honest, I was scared of that particular design from the beginning. Big face modifications are always challenging. And there's nothing worse than visible edges and ugly transition going straight through your doll's face. It can easily make the doll looks just straight up ugly. My dolls can be creepy, but I don't want them to be ugly creepy. And my sculpting skills are still in development, let's say. I really want you to keep that in mind during this video. Of course, with each sculpting project I feel more and more comfortable with my materials and tools, but I am still nowhere near where I want to be as a sculptor, and I still feel the lack of experience. But I'm working on it, so please go easy on me. I thought that I can live with her ugly cheek, but I was wrong. So I covered the vinyl part of the face with properly cut cotton pad and sprayed 3 or 4 layers of Mr. Super Clear on the epoxy jaw to even the levels of those surfaces as much as I could. And slap me in the ass and call me a donkey. It actually kinda worked. So as I said before, I was pretty anxious about this project. So many things that were looking okay in my head but could go totally wrong in the real life. Honestly, I was completely ready to be finally defeated by the customization process. So this whole video is actually a recap of a big experiment that could end up a disaster at any point. And by disaster, I mean, of course, poor destroyed doll turned into something hideous. See it from Toy Story vibe, you know what I mean. But at this point, I was quite happy with this face-up and at the same time more and more anxious, because I just had this feeling in my gut that this doll will end up to be a disaster eventually. And there we have it. I decided to paint some patterns on her bald head, cause it felt too empty somehow. I used this pretty color shift greenish paint on top of the dark green one. I thought that it will look cool, and oh boy, was I wrong! But because it was paint, After just few minutes, it wasn't going anywhere without the help of acetone. And I didn't want to use acetone because it would easily destroy the already shaded forehead. So I came up with the idea that maybe some 3D texture made with UV resin will help this head look at least decent. I liked the texture, still didn't like the patterns. So I took the photo of her, went to work, showed the photo to my sister, and she was like, "Nah, it's not that bad." And I was like, "It is bad." So when I got back home, I covered the scalp with green. I knew that I'm risking destroying the whole face up, but I just couldn't stand those green dots. And I am so happy I did it. I am also very happy that I made this mistake in the first place. Because thanks to that, I came up with the 3D texture idea, and I really like how it looks in the end. And here's how my customization changed the doll. Can you see a difference? Finally, I could mutilate her body. So, plastic bag, wrap on the head, and let's go. I cut her torso in half. I also cut off one of her legs and then separated the thigh from the lower leg. The other leg I left intact. Oh, wait, no. I also cut off both of her feet. I sanded down the rough edges on each piece, the doll's plastic panties, and all the seams. Here I'm widening the range of movement of the right arm. With a thick wire and tons of hot glue, I reconnected the torso pieces. I curved some more into the right thigh and lower leg piece, and I drilled the holes for wire attachments. For the feet, I drilled bigger holes because I was gonna insert 2 thick wires in each ankle. I started connecting the pieces and gluing the legs in a final pose. After the super glue dried, I filled bigger gaps with hot glue. I also decided to cut into her right hand's fingers so I could pose them in a more grabby way. Time for some epoxy. I mixed equal portions of compound A and B and covered all the joints. After a night of curing, I sanded the surface to make the transition smooth and as seamless as possible. This is a long, boring and messy process, but the more time you will spend on it, the nicer result you will get after painting. As you most likely noticed, I haven't given her any feet yet. It's because the feet will be permanently connected to the cut tail that our froggy will be grabbing. I quickly designed the wire placement and after quite some work, voila! I heated up a lot of Warblast scraps and created the cut tail from it. First, I shaped the stalk and sanded it down to make it nice and even. For foam or thermoplastic sanding, I'm using my Dremel, not my typical micromotor. Here with a Dremel, I'm giving some texture to the stalk. A little bit of heat smoothed the post-sanding roughness. And after that, it was time for the top part. I glued the doll to the cattail and also gave the rest of her joints their permanent positions. To the feet. With the epoxy sculpt magic, I sculpted a pair of big froggy feet, grabbing the cattail stalk. In a retrospect, I wish I made them a teeny tiny bit smaller, but once again, I'm still pretty lousy sculptor, so every practice counts. Once again, I gave the cured epoxy a good old sanding. I really spared no time on it. It always pays off at the end. Normally, I just wipe the dust away with a wet tissue, but this time I gave my girl a proper shower. She is a water creature after all. After she dried, I covered the warbler cattail with 3 layers of watered-down Vicol glue. It makes thermoplastic easier to paint. Before priming and painting the body, I drilled 4 holes for the wings. I know that some of you are already typing, "Yo girl, frogs do not have wings." Well, duh. But I am not making a humanoid frog. I am making a fairy. And all my fairies have wings. Even my pumpkin fairy. So, shush. I primed the doll with a grey primer and then put some base colors on with my airbrush. I based my froggy girl on a red-eyed tree frog. At least I based her color on the specific frog. I don't think that my fairy is a nocturnal creature, and I'm not sure if you can find a cattails in rainforests. But she is a part of my fantastical world, so once again I took some artistic freedom here. Those frogs are just the prettiest. When I was picking this doll, I thought that it's perfect that she has those membranes between her fingers. Well, now I know it is not perfect at all. But once again, artistic freedom. Base colors were ready, so I sprayed on 3 layers of MSC, made some 3D texture on her back and thighs to match her head, and used pan pastels and regular soft pastels to match the green color and add shades and blushings. I quickly noticed that I am not able to properly match the green tones with the wrap covering her head, so I removed it. When the shading and blushing on the body was done, I painted the cat tail with acrylic paints, sprayed it with MSC and gave it some pastel shading. Fixed all the shading with another layer of MSC. With a yellow watercolor pencil, I drew the characteristic markings on both sides of my girl's torso and painted them on with yellow acrylic. Then fixed it once again with the last layer of matte varnish. The top of the cat tail is normally fluffy. So with Elmer's glue, I glued on 3 layers of fluff that I made from brushed out brown yarn. Of course, I let the glue dry completely between each layer. And I finished it with the last layer of glue to fix everything in place. For the doll itself, I still needed to make 2 things. First thing were the wings. As always, I made them from UV resin, but this time I thinned the resin with yellow resin dye. As I said before, I don't care that frogs do not have wings. She's not a frog, she's a fairy. And because in my mind my fairies are like a separate group of animals, like mammals or reptiles, they all need something common that makes them belong to the group. So let's say humanoid body with wings. And just like with birds, every fairy species does have wings, but not all of them can actually fly. For example, wings of the frog fairies are a little bit smaller and are only used as a support to help the fairy jump higher and farther. As you can see, I also made the second set of teeny tiny wings. They will be part of our froggy's dinner. What is a frog without its long, sticky tongue? So I made one for my girl from a thick wire covered with epoxy. And of course, as a main dish, I sculpted a fly. I wanna say tiny, but in fact, it's pretty big. I connected the fly to the tongue and wait until it cured. Then I drilled holes for the wings, sanded the surface with a nail buffer, sprayed with black base paint, painted the tongue with acrylics, and shaded with pastels. Finally, I fixed the paint job with MSC. And I even used my color shifting paint on the fly. With the wings glued on, it looks pretty cool to me. When I was sculpting her mouth, I made a hole in them, so I could glue the tongue inside. I mixed some red resin dye with UV resin and filled the mouth with it. With the same tinted resin, I covered the whole tongue so it would look moist and sticky. Liquitex gloss varnish for her eyes and lips. And here she is with all her parts. To the stand. So I made a textured base from a wooden block and my usual kitty litter and wood glue mixture. Then I needed to sand the sides on my belt sander to make them as perpendicular to the base as possible. I was eyeballing this, so it was not perfect, but good enough. With a big drill, I made a hole for our cattail that I glued inside with a ton of hot glue. I painted the stand with brown acrylics and fixed the paint job with a layer of Mod Podge. Few more holes, some grass, some rocks and tiny bushes glued with more Mod Podge, and after all of it dried, time for the biggest experiment here. In this very helpful cup that tells me how much resin I need to use, I mixed my epoxy resin and added few drops of blue and yellow ink. For the stand, I created this nice aquarium from measured and cutted plexiglass pieces that I glued together with a hot glue. I put the cup with the resin in a vacuum chamber. I was using this baby for the first time, so I was very nervous. Here come the bubbles. That means it works. The vacuum chamber will evacuate the air bubbles that got to the resin during the mixing process. That means less bubbles in the final cast. After 72 hours, the resin cured completely and I could take down the plexiglass mold. The resin was mostly nice and clear. Most of the remaining bubbles were coming out of my kitty litter stand, so maybe that wasn't the best choice for this particular project. And majority of them appeared in the front, because why wouldn't they? But I was pretty satisfied nonetheless. I got rid of the sharp edges and filled some bigger holes with UV resin. Last thing left to do were some ripples on the water surface that I created with high gloss Mod Podge spread around with my airbrush. When it dried, the frog fairy was done. I am beyond happy that I made her. It was such an intimidating project for me. So many things could go wrong or just end up looking bad, but everything in fact turned out as I planned. She's a little bit weird, but in a good way, I think. I really like her colors. The tongue with a fly looks neat. Even the mistake of painting the pattern on her scalp resulted in this cool froggy texture, so in the end, I regret nothing. I made friends with my airbrush and my new vacuum chamber is working great. In general, a very successful project, and I was so afraid of making it. I also think she ended up very unique and truly one of a kind doll figurine. Am I normal? Probably not. But who cares? If I could change just one thing, I would place the cattail with the fairy a little bit more at the center of the stand. But other than that, self 5. But what do you think? Do you like my new fairy, even though she ended up being so far away from the original doll? Let me know in the comments, cause I would love to hear your thoughts. Anyway, I hope that you at least enjoyed the process. And if you did, please give this video a thumbs up. If you are curious about what I'm gonna do next, make sure to subscribe to my channel and smash the bell button for the future notifications. Thank you guys for watching and see you soon!